We are recording. All right, so this is our Black History Month event hosted by the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. Welcome. Okay, and so today we're going to be talking with Lucas Rouggly and Lenny Barber of LOVEtheLOU, and I'm actually going to let them sort of introduce themselves, but I am going to share with you guys how I became involved with LOVEtheLOU in just a second. So I appreciate you all coming. But before we do, we wanted to make sure that you knew how to handle your Zoom account. And so if you want to have the main speaker, you've got that speaker view button up in the corner there. If you want to have the main speaker central to your screen. You can mute. Yeah, Howard is pointing out what a handsome picture we're looking at of a person named Howard Wall. And so the mute button you can use, although I think everyone is kind of automatically going to be muted during the talk, just so we don't have any of those funny, dogs barking or anything like that in the background. So you won't have to worry about that. And you can share your video, particularly when we get to the Q&A. That'll be more relevant to share your video. And then you can see the list of other participants that are there, and of course that are here, I should say. And of course, go ahead and use the chat liberally, because I'm actually going to be drawing the Q&A from the chat. So I will be monitoring the chat as Lucas and Lenny talk. And I will be kind of, if three of you ask a similar question, I'll kind of combine it or whatever. But I will give you a shout out when we get to your question. Let's see. Is that everything? Okay, yes. And so we have the executive director and founder, as well as the community director of LOVEtheLOU. Yeah. That's not our soundtrack at the Hammond Institute.
Yeah.
Playing in the background. No, I should have just said it was.
That theme music.
Okay, so we have muted everyone just so we don't have those funny, background noises. So I will just say I met Lucas at a meeting of a group called Gateway to Flourishing. It's kind of an informal group of Christian business people who are trying to think about the way that they go about doing their philanthropy and whether or not they're doing it in such a way that they're really supporting the dignity of people and helping people to actually emerge from poverty, as opposed to just sort of surviving until tomorrow, right? And that takes a lot more thought and a lot more intentionality. And so this group comes together and really does a lot of deep reading and discussion, and we bring together good examples of this kind of work from around our city. And we hear from them. So I was able to meet Lucas, and I was already kind of sensitive to these issues because I'd seen the film Poverty, Inc. I've actually shown that movie on campus, which deals with the way that certain kinds of philanthropy and aid can actually undermine people in a very counterintuitive way, and it can cause kind of unintended consequences. And I highly recommend the film Poverty, Inc., which is streaming. And so when I talked to Lucas, we just absolutely resonated, because I could hear how intentional the model of LOVEtheLOU is. And so we worked together. We did some things with the Acton Institute. LOVEtheLOU is now a poverty cure partner with the Acton Institute. And eventually Lucas actually invited me to be on the board of LOVEtheLOU. And so I'm very happy to work with this organization and promote what they do, not just because they're doing good things, but because they're doing good things in an extremely thoughtful way, and a way that learns from our past mistakes. And so sometimes we have to take a good, long, hard look at whether what we're doing is working. And I think that can be really tough sometimes. So that's a big part of my inspiration for LOVEtheLOU. So I'm going to turn it over to Lucas and Lenny. Take it away.
Yeah, appreciate it, Rachel. My name is Lucas. My story in a nutshell is that my family and I, we moved into North St. Louis about 10 years ago. And we started LOVEtheLOU kind of from around my kitchen table. A good way to think about what we're doing is we have this massive engine of volunteers that help run a lot of our projects in the city. And so we will focus, we kind of go neighborhood by neighborhood throughout North St. Louis. And we focus on three main things. We'll go youth mentoring, career development, and then housing equity and kind of building up families that way. So basically put, as an individual, I want to see the city flourish. And I know that there's a lot of needs. And so I just want to be a part of the solution.
And I'm Lenny Barber. I'm born and raised in St. Louis. I left for a little bit, moved down to Texas, met my beautiful bride, came back. So got 4 little kiddos running around. I've been doing youth ministry for about 15 years. Then came on board with LOVEtheLOU like late 2015, early 2016, and came in to handle that mentoring piece of the program. Left for a little bit, and I'm back now just helping develop a new piece of the program, which will focus on 18 to 25-year-olds, help them to get to the point of what's next after high school, after I get my GED. So very, very appreciative of being here with you guys tonight.
Yep. We're calling this the slow work of revitalizing St. Louis. And it's because, and we've talked a lot about this, there is no microwave approach. There is no quick process to seeing change. This is the crock pot kind of situation. So it's going to take us a while to see true change. And so this is kind of our story. We're hoping tonight to share a lot about what we do with LOVEtheLOU and kind of just share our philosophy of change.
Yeah, so we just want to focus on like two areas tonight. Number one being like practical steps that you guys can do as an individual, and then just practical steps that you can do if you're already a part of an organization, if you're looking to get part of a nonprofit, and then just pretty much share some of our success stories, things that have worked in the lives of our students, and then of course take some Q&A at the end.
Yep. So we'll get started. So we were thinking through to how to present this, because we do a lot and we get to share a lot. And we've really tried to boil it down to 4 action steps that we feel are going to be important for seeing transformation in this region and for St. Louis. And so, like any good 12-step recovery program, and we were talking, like this was even a couple of weeks ago where we were just talking, we're like, how cool would it be to see not just individuals, go through Celebrate Recovery or a 12-step program, but to see a city kind of rally around that. And so, as you might know, any 12-step program, the very first step towards change is going to be admitting that you have a problem. So that's where we start. As a city, step number 1, we've got some problems and we need to address them. And so that's where we're going to start.
Yeah, and here's the thing: it's not just a black-white thing. There are some deeper roots at work, and so race is not the only issue that St. Louis has. There's rich versus poor. There's county versus city. We have to recognize that we are divided. As hard as it is to hear, it's even harder to say. We still are divided, and it's a problem. It's a true problem.
Yeah, one way to describe St. Louis, especially for those of you who aren't familiar with St. Louis, and maybe you're from out of town coming in for school, but we as a region kind of operate as small towns. Rather than one large city, we're a bunch of small towns that are kind of grouped together. And that actually could be a huge strength of ours, but most of the time we see it as a negative, where we're kind of in our bubble. We don't form relationships outside of our circle, out of our little small town, if you will. And we kind of stay in that. And we're weaker for that. And so you'll see at different points, you'll see all these different municipalities almost competing against each other rather than working towards. And so when we begin to think about a solution for St. Louis, we don't think, and what we're going to present tonight is not a top-down solution. And maybe you're familiar with the Better Together merger that was attempted a few years back. I'm all for unity. I'm all for mergers, but that was almost like, not that you're forcing it upon people, but we'd rather like see it kind of grow up naturally. So what we're going to present is this idea that we think relationships are going to be at the center of change, which is going to be a bottom-up kind of approach.
Yeah. So with Lucas saying, the city operating more like small towns, I think it's evident when a certain stat came out back in 2016, where it says O'Fallon, Missouri was the fourth best community in the United States to live in. The United States, not just Missouri. It was the fourth best in the whole United States. And so you're basically saying 15 minutes further west from where Lindenwood sits is the fourth best community in the country. But yet 25 minutes going east, the opposite, it's the worst in the country, beating out Compton, beating out Baltimore, beating out Detroit. And so that's a huge issue, to have the best and the worst right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, and that's still going on.
Yeah.
Now, here's a little bit of good news, because I know that can be a little frustrating. But when we started LOVEtheLOU 10 years ago, I remember, so I moved into the city and I would go back out to the county. And in doing that, I would share some of the stories that I was seeing with my neighbors. And I remember trying to convince people at the time that we had some problems. And this is pre-Ferguson.
Yeah.
This is before anything really hit the news. I almost said something else, hit the fan. But it was all like, it was all this below the surface kind of turmoil that we weren't recognizing. And so I think some good news for us tonight is that I think we're at a spot right now where we're probably starting to admit that we've got some problems.
Yeah.
And it's definitely become a national issue.
Yeah.
It's definitely become something that's at a forefront of a news cycle.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hoping is that we could continue on in that vein of just saying, yeah, we've got some problems. But let me ask you this question, right? Okay, if you had to define what the problems are, like how would you go? Is it just racism, or
No,
is that a piece of it? Or?
Racism is definitely a piece, and that would take a whole nother night to talk about. I think our city is full of history of just horrible stuff when it comes to the issue of race, but I think it's even more deeper, especially now in today's climate. I would probably boil it down to fear. I think fear is the number one thing that is the driving force behind all of this stuff, so you got people that are afraid to cross the bridge to come into St. Louis County. You have St. Louis County folks, some are afraid to drive further east on 270 to North City. Mm-hmm. You got folks that won't even cross the bridge going into East St. Louis. So fear is definitely a driving force behind a lot of this stuff, and it cripples you, it paralyzes you. Mm-hmm. Because the biggest thing for me is I feel that fear of places, so I'm afraid to go down here, and therefore it turns into a fear of people. Okay. So a fear of places creates fear of people.
Okay, so if you're all tweeting this out, Lenny Barber just said, fear of places creates fear of people.
Oh, it's true though.
I think that we've seen that.
Yeah.
Like you're exactly right. Like people are scared to go into, it's a fear of the unknown.
Yep.
Almost, like they're scared to go where they don't know.
Yeah. And
therefore we very much live in this culture where we're told that we're supposed to then be against what we don't know.
Yep.
And you can get that definitely. So one of the things, once again, for those of you that aren't familiar with St. Louis, there's there's a question that has almost become a joke, but it's what high school did you go to?
Yeah.
And that almost gets into what you're talking about there.
Oh, it
where
definitely is.
That's not really a question of concern about an education as much as it is trying to mentally segregate that person, put them in a place, and then say, okay, I know all about you.
Yeah, because based upon the answer that you give me, I'm going to put you in a certain category.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you over here in this category. Oh, you went to so-and-so? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so we've got to admit that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to move past that joke.
Yeah.
and I get it. Like I understand it, but then we've got to like move forward.
Yeah.
Right. So what would you say the next step is?
Like for me, in the center of all of this stuff, I think it boils down to that simple thing of listening. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by listening is, so once again, if we're going back to the whole 12-step thing, if you guys are familiar with it, I personally feel like the listening aspect kind of falls into the steps that talks about soul searching, and then the step that talks about humility, because I really feel like humility is the big thing that's missing in all of these kind of conversations. You have to truly, truly humble yourself to listen to the other side, and listening to understand, not listening to have an opinion, to have a comeback. It's listening to learn rather than listening to argue.
Yeah. I've got a coach that I've worked with over the years, and he's great at leadership stuff. And at one point, he just threw out the exercise and he said, what is one audacious, like huge goal that LOVEtheLOU could have, that if you actually wrote it down and put it up on a wall somewhere, people would say that's ridiculous. That could never be done. And so I went through this exercise with him, and I wrote out just kind of this process of like, what if there were no places in St. Louis that people were afraid to go?
That's huge.
Like what if we actually got rid of those places where people were afraid to go? What if we started seeing people come out of their bubbles and start bridging those gaps and working together? I think that would be kind of miraculous. That would be like this huge deal for St. Louis. In fact, I think it would be kind of at the forefront of what other cities needed to see.
No, totally.
And so that's one of the things that we've worked towards as an organization, is just to see changed minds, changed hearts, new relationships formed.
And that's the key word, relationships.
And that gets into, so if you're taking notes, first we got to admit there's a problem.
Yep.
But second, like we've got to relationally, like we've got to listen. Got to listen to each other. And that's hard because we live in a culture that
everybody wants to be heard
all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just like we live in a time period, and I know I'm not saying anything that you guys don't know, but there is more information available to us now than there ever has been. And it's almost like we've gotten information overload.
No, it is.
So much so that we only will associate, we've kind of shut out everything else that we don't agree with. And we only associate with those that we do agree with. And it's killing our relationships.
Yeah. So unity now looks like I'll be unified with you as long as you agree with me on what I feel. As long as we're identical, you know, we live in the same bubble. We like the same music. We look the same. We dress the same, talk the same.
Right.
That's not stretching yourself. That's not challenging yourself.
Right.
That's just being comfortable.
Right. And so if we pause right here and take what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is a huge deal for our city. And really for us as individuals, because if we want to see change, if you're saying, I love St. Louis and I want to see it, grow and flourish and thrive as a city, then we're going to have to get uncomfortable. We're going to have to listen to people that maybe we don't even agree with or might not even like them.
Yep. They're going to be hard. I call them hard conversations. It's hard for a reason.
Right. So let me ask you this. How do we listen? What are some practical steps of how we can listen? and maybe how we've seen it play out.
I think it's that biggest thing, what I said earlier, of humility, of willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. It's almost like throw out what you think you know, what you've heard, what you've read, and get it directly from the source. You know, I think you say it best when you say it's a posture thing. It's really a thing of getting in that space and once again listening to learn.
Mhm.
So like, I'm a product of Pruitt-Igoe projects. Both my parents were raised in Pruitt-Igoe. If you guys know anything about St. Louis, Pruitt-Igoe projects was a big deal back in the 50s, 60s. So both my parents come from that area. And so for me, I have a different perspective of it because I've sat and listened to the stories. I've heard it directly from the source. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot different from the person who watched the documentary that got put out, mm-hmm. especially for somebody else around the country who doesn't even know jack about St. Louis, and they watched the documentary. Mm-hmm. But sitting and listening and soaking it all in of what my parents told me, because they walked the streets, right? They were in the hallways of the humongous apartment buildings that stretched up to the sky. You know what I mean? And so I think if we can seriously put ourselves in the situation of, hey, I hear you and tell me more. Yeah. Instead of, you're wrong, let me tell you why you're wrong.
Right.
We got to move past that.
So my story, a lot of my story had started with Jesus. So it's a lot of faith stuff. And Jesus says it, does this thing where he says, he who has ears, let him hear. Right. Which kind of is like this thought that you could be sitting like next to Jesus.
Yeah.
And still not really be listening.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Yeah. My grandmother used to say, boy, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth for a reason. You gotta listen more. And so I don't think
Lenny's grandma.
Yeah, Jesus, Lenny's grandma. Source, yeah. No, it's a thing where I don't think we're doing enough of listening to learn.
Yeah.
So I saw a t-shirt the other day that reads, more conversation, less debate. And I'm like, yeah, this is what we need.
Yeah.
It's what we need.
So one thing that I've liked about you, if I could, not to get all mushy, first of all, I grew up in Jackson, Missouri. There was one black kid in the whole town. And so
he's probably on the basketball team.
He was on the basketball team. He was good at basketball.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm a white guy. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. And I move into a black neighborhood.
Yeah.
And those stereotypes were correct too. White men can't jump.
You're all right. I've seen you play. You're good.
But what I've noticed is that when you're starting to listen and you're crossing cultures, mm-hmm. There's a listening and there's a clarifying. What do you mean when you say this? Or one of the things that I've really appreciated about our relationship is you've actually given me permission to say certain things.
Yeah.
Like at one point I came up to Lenny and I said, now, do I have to say African-American every single time?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's kind of a mouthful. Can I say the word black?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to say anything else. But can I say, and to go back and forth and to have bonds where it's not tokenism. So this isn't like I've got my token black friend that then represents an entire culture.
Because that's not the case.
It's a relationship. So you're seeing past skin, but you're recognizing that race plays a part of everybody's identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's another example. Think about those early conversations you were having when you first got in the neighborhood of those kids talking to you about the police.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and some of that, and that's a good example. Because coming from Jackson, Missouri, and this would have been 2011, 2012, I'll tell you that some of my heroes were police officers in Jackson, Missouri. Officer Hammers, if you're watching, I love you. I wanted to be a cop growing up.
And that is like super rare for a Black kid in the inner city to say that.
Which was like kind of rattled me.
Yeah.
And I heard a lot of stories moving into the neighborhood. So I'm living on Enright, and I heard some kids say, they use like, oh, that is a dirty cop.
Yeah.
I didn't think that was even possible.
Yeah.
I was like, well, no, you're misinformed. You don't understand. And that went on for a year or two for me, hearing stories and trying to clarify and trying to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I actually saw it and understood it in a very personal way that I actually even gave it credence. But it was this piece of listening, clarifying, listening, and then having the willingness to say, okay, maybe I don't have all of it figured out. And maybe Jackson, Missouri is a little different than St. Louis City.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some different issues that would happen there.
Yeah. And I think that word willingness, that definitely leads to step number 3 in all of this, of what we call proximity. And once again, going back to the 12-step thing, this would fall under the step of willingness and the steps of service. So willingness, we try to tackle that question of how do we change minds? How do we change the thought process in an individual? So in our case, more so it's with students. How can I get a student to get a different outlook on this? Well, for us, it starts with relationships. So I got to get close to that kid. I got to get proximity to that kid, to that individual. It's be willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation to deal with a student or an individual who hasn't been raised the same as you, who's got a different background, who comes from a different culture. So for us, it is that.
Yeah, you might have to, with this, you might have to, talk to somebody that watches Fox News, or vice versa, you might have to, but it's definitely going to cause you to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's definitely the idea of proximity. And I learned this once again in moving to Enright. I moved to Enright and did this physical move into the neighborhood. And the very next day realized that not only did I need to physically move, but I had to get to know my neighbors.
Yeah.
Like I felt like there was this call, this burden to land in the neighborhood, but not just to move for real estate purposes, but to really get to know people. And that's two different things.
Yep.
So we're not talking proximity, just like getting close to somebody.
No, because everybody's not built to do that.
Right.
To do what you
right.
do.
And that's definitely not what we're saying either. That everybody needs to move to the city.
Yeah.
What we're saying is getting out of your bubble once again, and relationally connecting with somebody who might think differently, who might act differently, might be a different skin color, who might be in a different socioeconomic culture background than you are.
And then once again, it falls under this. If we're trying to get close, if we're trying to build a bond, if you're trying to help me out in a certain situation, it goes back to, once again, listening to my needs, to the issues that are going on. If I want to see some true change happen in the lives of the students that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, I got to hear where they're coming from.
Right.
I got to hear their opinions and thoughts on certain things. I got to hear what's working and what's not working.
Yeah.
And so this is all part of building relationships, but relationships is the key thing.
So if we pause right there, and I'll just do a quick recap. We got to admit that we have a problem.
Yep.
We got to listen. And then we got to move in relationally. I know that when I say that sounds strange. And that is not necessarily what politicians would say. Yeah, this is going to lead us into a better St. Louis.
No.
However, think with me, if you will. We're going on about 100 years of decline as a city. And we've experienced a lot of change, but I don't know that we've experienced transformation.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is what we're talking about is at a little bit of a deeper level than just moving people around.
Yeah.
Gentrification, if you will.
Yeah.
I would love during the Q&A, I would love for there to be some questions about gentrification, because I think that we can get into that. But what we are seeing and what we're experiencing with this kind of model, which I know sounds a little hippie-ish, I don't know what, you know, but what we're
different. It's a different approach.
What we're experiencing is like a deep, lasting change.
Yeah.
As opposed to just kicking all of the people of one skin color out of the neighborhood and moving in a different demographic.
Yeah. And the reason why we're saying that this kind of falls into that whole stage or step, if you will, of willingness is when you look at the 12 steps, the willingness is that step of you going to make amends with somebody or some people. And so for us, willingness is that step of, in essence, helping make amends in the lives of these young people. We keep saying slow because our approach is one kid at a time. We understand and realize that we are not going to change the city of St. Louis overnight. But if I can grab one student and then that student grab two of his homeboys, you understand what I'm saying? That's the approach that we're taking. And so my mindset every day is when I wake up, how can I help one student get 1% better than yesterday?
Yep.
That's really the approach that we try to take. But there has to be a willingness inside of me, inside of Lucas, inside of every single person that's a part of our team, the volunteers that come down. There has to be a willingness to go there.
And that's so when we say the word listen, there's such an active part that we're wanting you to have. There's such a posture of outward focus that has to be a part of this solution.
Yeah.
So if we are going to get healthier, and I believe we can as a city, then we have to move from pockets of people that are looking inside to pockets of people that are celebrating who they are and focused outside. And then I think we begin to really experience some beautiful diversity that's not just white and black, but that begins to bridge city and county and rich and poor and throwing in all kinds of other issues there. I remember for me, when this idea of proximity and moving in and listening to people, when I was working with a lot of the teenagers on Enright, we would have guys say that their biggest need was just to get a job. And so I would say, great. And I would get them a job at McDonald's and they would be like struggling the next week that they just needed a job, you know? And there was, so as I really got to know them and got to be in their life and not just listen, but to be close to them. I realized that some of their situations are connected, not just to that job, but to the driver's license, to how they're going to read, to get their permit test,
to filling out the application,
to all of these other pieces, to what's going on at home, to what's happening in their life with trauma, different issues that they're going through. And so the only way I would know that is if I'm close to them, if I'm getting into a relationship. So then it became a lot less about, we got to just get you a job.
Or the whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Right.
I hate that expression.
It moved into like, let's really begin to work on some of these other things.
Because so that expression, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. We've talked about this. It's a thing where, okay, what if they don't even have boots? Then what?
Right.
And that's what we're running into. It's like, oh, it's easy to say go get a job, but bro, you're struggling to fill out the application.
Right.
You don't even know how you're going to get there.
Right.
And let's be real, there aren't a ton of jobs here in the city. They're going to have to go elsewhere, you know, the closest neighborhood. So probably to the Galleria area from where we're sitting. So it's a thing where there's more issues at work than just get a job.
I would be willing to guess that the reason you struggle, or that any of us would struggle with that idea of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, is because there's a disconnect in relationship. So
Absolutely.
it sounds like an ignorance saying because there's a lack of relationship.
Yes.
Because when you're in it, with that person, you realize like, oh, this isn't as simple as just go get a job.
Yep, it's deeper.
There's much deeper things at play. And so I appreciate that. That's a good connection. So last thing that we want to hit on, and we'll hopefully spend a decent amount of time on this because I think it's probably the main point.
Yeah.
So our organization is called LOVEtheLOU, and we've spent a lot of time really diving into what we would define as love. Because once again, you can wear a t-shirt that says "I love the city," and that's about as deep as it goes.
Yeah.
But we would say step 4 of what's going to bring about change after admitting we got a problem, listening, moving in close proximity. Step 4 is going to be sacrificial love. And we're saying that, and once again, mine definitely comes from a faith component.
Right.
But what I'm saying is love that is an action. So you're not just saying it, but you're doing something.
Yeah.
And that you got some skin in the game.
Yeah.
That you're offering who you are in to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And here's some good news for you guys. I think St. Louis has some incredible people.
Yes.
Like I think that the solution is not going to be millions and millions more dollars. Now we'll take millions of dollars. That's great. But I honestly think that the solution is probably present in the people that we have
Absolutely
already here.
Yeah.
That just need to understand how they can give sacrificially, how they can give back to the city.
Yeah, it's a thing where I'll just give you a couple of examples. Carlene is one of our main mentors. She's part of the team. She's in charge of over every single student that comes in and wants to be a part. If you want to be a part of LOVEtheLOU, you got to go have a sit down with Miss Carlene. That's just part of it. So Carlene is mentoring a kid named Andrew. Andrew pops off one day. He gets ticked off. He decides to kick her car, puts a dent in her car. She just got the car. She's saved up. It's in essence is her baby, right? Let's fast forward like a couple of years later to last week, actually.
Last week.
The same car that Andrew kicked and put a dent in, he drove that car to take and pass his driver's license test. So that's just an example of like, I'm sacrificing the fact that I want to choke you right now to I'm going to keep loving on you. All right. A guy by the name of Andy Bell comes down, a contractor from Wildwood, Missouri.
Yeah.
And it starts off by building a simple little. Like,
he came down. He came down to just work in a garden.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he did that. And then the next weekend, he's like, hey, I want to bring some tools down. So he brings a table saw, hooks it up to a generator, and teaches some of the neighborhood kids in North City.
Builds a little library.
Yeah. How to build a little library.
How hold some books that's going to hold, it holds books for the neighborhood. It's a community library.
And so he does that. The kids loved it.
Yeah.
The very next day, Andy Bell calls me. So it's a Sunday. He calls me and he's really excited. And he says, hey, I want to do this every single weekend. And I was like, and we get a lot of calls, from people wanting to do stuff. So I was kind of like, yeah, right. But he was for real. He wants to come down. He kind of cast this vision for starting up a wood shop.
Yeah.
And so I gave him this hole in the wall. Like there was a dead cat in this building. I gave him this building that had been donated to us. The floorboards were missing.
Horrible.
He cleans this whole spot up, gathers a team.
Yeah.
He gets like 10 carpenters, and they every Saturday are teaching neighborhood, like teenage guys from the neighborhood and gals from the neighborhood how to do woodworking. Well, now we've got guys that are now working construction because of him. Yeah. Guys that are going into, we're starting one in the labor union. I forget which union he's working with, but he's moving in to like a union job. And all they did was learn from a carpenter from Wildwood how to build little library.
Yeah.
but it was able to raise them up and build some confidence.
And it's a huge sacrifice for him. Going back to the sacrificial love, it turned into a thing of loving on these kids.
Yeah.
And him having to sacrifice time, energy, effort, gas money, getting down here from Wildwood. It's big.
We see there's a lot of organizations that are starting to do this and that have been doing this for even longer than we have. So there's I can think of Building Futures, Dream Builders. This is just within woodworking.
Yeah.
There's a group that I believe it's Dream Builders, but they are taking houses, and they're taking old vacant houses, renovating them, and then hiring on North City teenagers to help them. And while they're doing it, they'll teach them how to do drywall, how to do plumbing, how to do electrical, so that these guys can then go get certified so that they can get jobs and head into careers.
Yeah.
And so we see a lot of different organizations that are doing it. The really cool thing, and once again, if I could just encourage you, is this doesn't take a bunch of geniuses sitting around a table saying, like, how do we fix the city?
Right.
This is one guy, Andy Bell, who says, I'm good at woodworking. I want to offer it. And then he says, I want to show love tangibly. So I'm going to take my skill and pour it into somebody else. It's like this apprenticeship, and maybe we've lost that in our society, but I think if we can kind of bring that back through these actions of love, there's some good stuff there.
Yeah. Cause you're just sparking something and sparking confidence in our young people as well. So.
Yeah. So, one story that I love that we've experienced this year, and we've got a lot of these kind of stories. But in 2019, there was a church that was out in Maryland Heights. And so Grace Church, they wanted to do something for the city. And so they bought a vacant house and they fixed it up. And they, it took them a year to fix up, and they gave it to one of my neighbors. So Tawana Lawson took this over as a rent to own.
Yep.
And she worked with us. She moved her mom in, she moved her kids in, she moved her grandkids in. So it's this generational home. She was the first one in her entire family to own a home. Just incredible stuff.
And now she gets to pass it down.
Yeah.
Pass it down to her kids.
Legacy type work.
Yeah.
So we were working with her, and we built the lease to be twofold. One is that we wanted it to have a financial component. So she's paying this house off in 10 years, and there's no interest, and it's something that she can afford. So that was very important to her and to us. The second piece is that she was going to volunteer some time to serve the community.
Yeah.
And so we're really seeing this. It's different than Habitat for Humanity. This is where we're setting up a pillar, and the house begins this whole process. So it's 10 years of her really being a pillar and a lighthouse to the neighbors. And so we signed everything January 1st. COVID hit in March, and we were talking about, like, how do we serve during COVID? Like, what does this look like? And so she came up with the idea of giving groceries to elderly families that were in the neighborhood in North St. Louis, and just dropping off groceries so that they didn't have to get out of the house. And so she started off with like 6, and then it was like 10, and then it grew to like 20. And then I got kind of busy with my summer, and I think I checked in July, August, so late July and August, and she was up to 120 families that she was serving each week. Crazy. And it grew to 180 families that she was serving, and she started partnering, and she started building this team. And I want you, so this is the encouragement that I have for you guys, is that when we talk about this slow work of revitalization, it's probably underwhelming to hear Lenny say something like one kid at a time. Like, how is that going to change a population of 3 million? Like, one at a time, that's too slow.
Yeah.
I understand. I get that. That's where my brain has gone too. But we're seeing something different play out in the city, because when the right person changes, and then like there's this momentum explosion around them.
Yep.
When you have one church that pours into one family that builds one house, and then all of a sudden it explodes out into 180 families, that starts to change the bubbles. Because you've had all these relational overlaps that have happened.
Yeah, and I get it. I can totally picture some of y'all sitting there right now thinking, dude, love is too extreme of a word. How in the heck am I supposed to love somebody that I don't even know? What are you talking about? All right, then let's begin with love for the city. Hopefully you have some kind of love for the city of St. Louis. And I'm not talking North City. I'm just saying St. Louis in general. Well, if you do something long enough and you that love is going to grow into something else. All right. It's no different from the person who wants to go over to a third world country, start helping dig some wells for a particular village or whatever, right? Because you love people and you want to do something good. Well, I guarantee you, if you stay there in that spot, in that village for long enough, you're probably going to develop some love for the folks of that village. And it's no different than what's happening with us here in North City. Now, what's crazy is that the majority of our students have a hard time receiving love. Like I said earlier, about 40 different students. It's 40 different horror stories, 40 different obstacles, trials, and tribulations. Numerous stories of dad not being involved, mom not caring enough, whatever the case may be. And so we've tried to surround these students with folks that love them enough to show up at sporting events, to show up at activities, to take them once again on college visits, to help them on their resume building and things like that. And then all of a sudden, those attitudes and those walls that they've put up, they're not popping off as much. They're not so ready to snap back at us. They're not kicking dents in our cars. You know what I mean? It's a little bit overwhelming at first, simply because it's so foreign to them. But the more we keep doing it, and the more we're willing to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, and the more we just keep loving on these kids, those walls begin to just break down.
And I'll take that one step further. And some of our biggest success stories that we've seen is when teenagers graduate, bust through all of the obstacles that they actually become overcomers, and realize that they can do anything. And so let me say it this way. Right now in the city of St. Louis, we've got some executives, we've got some presidents, we've got some people that are world changers. And they might not know it yet, but when they figure it out, there's nothing stopping them. And we're already seeing that drive. And the cool thing about what we're talking about, and we've got lots of examples of this, but especially when young people understand what's been given to them and how much they've overcome, they immediately give that back. And so there's this book, maybe you've heard of it, but Malcolm Gladwell wrote Tipping Point a while back. And it's just this idea that movements get started when certain people with unique insight start working together. And so it doesn't take the masses to bring about change. It truly could be about 5% of the population that works together that then creates this explosion. That's what we're already experiencing, and that's what we're hoping. So I get that there could be plenty of pushback on our model and what we're doing, and I understand that maybe you don't even get it and don't care. That's fine. We've had plenty of people say this is stupid. What we would say is
a couple of months ago, actually.
What we would say is, well, it's working. And it's kind of that analogy with all of the starfish You guys know the starfish story where, the guy's throwing back starfish and like, how could you possibly, there's 1,000 starfish on the land, and how could you possibly make a difference? And the guy throws back one and he goes, well, I made a difference in that one, and we're seeing that actually create these small momentum explosions. And so that's what we're inviting other St. Louisans into. That's what we get excited about. And honestly, it's making a lasting change.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for what you've said so far.
Absolutely.
We have the Q&A racking up here, so I want to get some of our questions going. Of course, we have a couple of kind of politics adjacent questions. For instance, how would you characterize the city government and your aldermen in what you're trying to do? Are they a help, hindrance, or neither? And another person brought up, what about crime? That person feels like that's such a big problem for the city and the politicians won't prioritize it. And, so any thoughts kind of on those sorts of questions?
Sure. I think that that we all play our part, and politics will play its part as well. So what I'm not suggesting is that we get rid of all politicians and that, we just hug each other. So that's not what I'm suggesting. And to answer the question practically, there's a lot of good politicians that care deeply in St. Louis. Yeah. We've got some really good aldermen and women that we've worked with, and that we'll continue to work with. Right now, a lot of the city politicians that we've worked with are overwhelmed, under budgeted, and really struggling. And so when we come along, and like we're forming a partnership with Slate right now. And Slate, for those of you who don't know, it's the city's, they're funded, I think, through several grants that are either federal or something like that. But basically they're looking to hire on young 17 to 24-year-olds.
Yeah, I think it's 16 to 24.
16 to 24-year-olds in the city, but to really raise them up and get them into careers. Well, we're working in a very similar field, and we had some great conversations with them the last few weeks, where rather than doing siloed work, let's collaborate. Let's get outside of our nonprofit bubble and make sure that we're working with the powers that be within St. Louis City.
Yeah. It's creating those relationships once again, even with politicians, school officials, superintendents, principals, teachers. It's trying to create relationships that are directly affecting our teens, our young people.
That was actually another question that came up, was what is LOVEtheLOU's relationship with schools? And Melissa was curious, what do you think of charter school movement in association with your work of revitalization? Is that helpful or a hindrance?
It's hard for me to speak on charter, but I will say when it comes to relationship with schools, we did and we're continuing to do our best as far as getting into the schools, once again being a part of these kids' lives. So we're showing up at their lunches, we're showing up in their classes. Some of the best days for me was showing up at their third hour history class and not knowing I was coming. But I set it up with their teacher of like, look, I'm on so-and-so about their grades. Can I sit in? Oh, sure. Absolutely. Matter of fact, you want to stay the whole day? You want to come next week? And so when we started building and cultivating these relationships, we didn't have to ask anymore. They were calling us, hey, I got 2 kids that might benefit from your program. Would you be willing to come meet them? Yeah, absolutely.
One of the problems that we didn't really talk about at the beginning, but right now the city of St. Louis, and I'm talking about like within the city limits, but specifically in North St. Louis, there's 35 individual neighborhoods that are all what I would say destabilized, meaning there's a physical destabilization where there's overwhelming amounts of vacancies, so at least 25% of the neighborhood is just empty lots and vacant buildings. But then you also have no banks, no grocery stores, no businesses. So when you have that kind of destabilization, you could have the best teachers and the most money, and the schools are still going to struggle.
Yeah.
So Lenny and I got to hang out with Superintendent Adams from the public schools, and he's basically saying the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we're what they're up against within the school district is just overwhelming.
Yeah, you can throw them $1 million, but the neighborhood is still like rough. There's still crime. There's still a lack of grocery stores, and there's still a lack of jobs. And so until those things get properly addressed, it's still gonna, it's like what Lucas said earlier, that it could be a change. A charter school could be a quick fix, but there's no true transformation. Because once again, there's several schools that are up for debate on whether we close or not. So Carnahan, school buildings. Carnahan, which is a high school more so on the south side, they're about to be changed into a middle school. And then you have, 3 elementary schools and another middle school that's about to close its doors. And so it's like, okay, charter could be the quick fix, but what's going to really bring about the transformation?
One of the things, just to back up what you're saying, I mean, one of the reasons that I'm so attracted to the model you're describing is because it's holistic.
Yes.
And so if you're walking with people in real proximity, as you were saying, then things are being healed in a kind of holistic, organic way, as opposed to, well, we have this one program for this one area of your life, but actually there's way more going on than just that one thing.
Can you ask the crime question again, Rachel?
Yeah, the crime question, it wasn't really a question. The person just said, crime is the big problem in the city and the politicians won't prioritize it. So
crime is the issue everywhere when we really think about it. But I think it's what Lucas said earlier. It is overwhelming. And for us, with this holistic approach, once again, it's taking a kid and trying to give them more options to the crime, if that makes sense. Because you know, one thing we constantly throw around here is like, man, do you seriously think a 12 or 13-year-old like wants to sell drugs? No. They 9 times out of 10, they feel like this is the only option that they got, because, you know, I got to start bringing money back into the home. I'm 13. I really can't go out here and get a job. And on top of that, I don't feel like waiting 2 weeks for a paycheck. When, you know, when Corner Man drives up with his nice Beamer, nice Benz, and says, hey, take this book bag over to such and such a block. I'm gonna give you, you know, you want to make $2,000 in a week? It's like, whoa.
Well, and to
that's just one example.
To speak to that issue too, one of the really cool victories that we've seen on Enright is that crime is way down because we're all looking out for each other.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of a thing in the city, but not a little bit. There's a culture in the city of snitches and ditches, which is a culture of fear.
Yep.
Basically, if somebody does something, you don't say anything about it, even to the authorities, because you're scared that you'll have your family threatened. There will be retaliation. My neighborhood in 2016, on my block, there were 7 shooting deaths on my block. So it was really bad. We had a ton of gang activity, and we were able to persevere and make it through because the 90% of neighbors who wanted to do good reclaimed their voice and basically said, we're going to stand up for what's right.
Yep.
And so I could tell you story after story of this relational model, being in each other's lives, listening, trying to understand where those gang members were coming from, working with them, giving them some new opportunities, seeing whether they could succeed or fail or not. And then like really working through all of that and then coming out on the other side.
Good. Another one somewhat related to politics is the gentrification one. What LOVEtheLOU's perspective toward the gentrification of parts of the city that has taken place over the last 20 years?
I would say, I personally think that St. Louis as a region has been gentrifying for 100 years. So I wouldn't just say 20. I would say and I don't have the map up, but I could show you where pockets move from downtown to Jennings to Florissant to St. Charles to Wentzville. There's a pathway that we've shuffled people at least over the last 60 years. And we've just kind of, whether it's a Black person moving into a white neighborhood or white people, kind of pushing out projects or tenement houses and restructuring things. I think we've experienced that. I think that's the norm for St. Louis. And what I'm suggesting is, what if we do something different? What if we try it a different way? Keep the neighbors, allow the neighbors to be the change, and then let's start to build from within.
Help the neighbors get better.
So one of the things that struck me is your example of the rent to own home for Tawana, where, you moved towards home ownership by the neighbors themselves. It might look like gentrification because there's community gardens and there's a beautiful rehabbed home and things are beginning to improve, but the people who are there are the people who were there 5 and 10 years ago. And so, on the other hand, I've heard somebody like Bob Lupton say, well, gentrification has its place because you do want to have more mixed income where people have a broader network, like for employment opportunities and things like that. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that idea.
No, go ahead.
I think that we could at some point say that there's a healthy gentrification,
right,
and that there's an unhealthy gentrification. Okay. And so what St. Louis has experienced is the complete removal of an entire neighborhood.
Right.
And maybe that takes 10 years, but that's what we've done. We've just moved people around, shuffled them around. That's unhealthy in the sense that, like, I feel called to my neighbors, and if my neighborhood gentrifies like it can and will, unless something is done, then my neighbors will be gone. Now I've got the means to stay, but very few of them would. And that's not fair. And so then the new ghetto, the new North City would be North County, Florissant maybe. And so what, going back to what Robert Lupton would say in that, like, I do think that right now on the North Side, there's thousands of vacancies that we would like to see filled by somebody. I don't care if that's white people, Black people, whomever, but new people coming in, which would create a new sort of feel for the neighborhood and a new culture. That's fine, as long as the neighbors get to stay,
right,
and as long as they're not pushed out.
So we've touched on some of the more sort of political or structural kind of questions that we got, but to return to the relational part of emphasis of your talk, Jorge is asking, what steps do you follow when trying to embrace a different point of view? Because biases and inner values are hard to put aside, which I thought was a really good way of putting it.
Yeah. I can tackle that one because in essence, I'm challenging myself to do that right now with a couple of different cultures that are completely opposite of mine. So number one, first off, it goes back to what we said earlier. It's willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable spot and put aside everything that you think you know. That's where it starts. And so if you're listening to have a debate and have a comeback, then you're doing it wrong, because we should all be listening to understand. And so for me personally, I am choosing to sit down with an Asian American, and I'm sitting down with a family that's from Israel. There's some business owners in the neighborhood in which I'm at. I mean, the hardcore accent, the dress, the culture, everything. I'm wanting to learn. I want to know more. And so we all have our own bias, our own thoughts and opinions. And a lot of times that stuff needs to just get pushed to the side and be willing to hear from a different side.
But don't you, and I really like that question, Jorge,
That's
because
a great question.
well, because you're actually saying part of the solution in recognizing that you have biases.
Yes.
Like, once again, you're saying, I know that I've got some biases
Mhm.
coming into this relationship. Where we run into problems is where people have really stubborn hearts,
I was gonna
stubborn
say,
attitudes,
want to stay with those biases.
and would never even admit that they would have a bias.
Yeah.
My way is the only way. So just to give you kind of how I've experienced this, my family on my dad's side comes from Bollinger County, and they're the type of rednecks, and I think we can say that. They're the type. My uncle will wear overalls with no shirt, like everywhere, like, and that's just acceptable. They taste snakes. They're strange people. I love them, and it's my family, right? But they cannot understand, like, they cannot understand me, much
Yeah.
less St. Louis, much less my neighborhood. The reason is because they literally have not been outside of Bollinger County. And they might be watching this, and I'm not trying to bash Bollinger County. I'm just trying to say that if you stay in it, and if you say this is how the world should be, well, you're missing out on a broader scope.
Yep. I'll give you another one. My wife is white, and her father wants absolutely nothing to do with me simply because I'm Black. And so
Wow.
the challenge for me is, how do I maintain who I am as an individual when I'm in the presence of this dude? And so once again, he's got his own thoughts, opinions, and biases of me. And granted, I have my own of him, but in order for this relationship to get better or to even start, I have to sit down with him and say, okay, why do you think the way that you think? Why do you believe the way that you believe? And so now the conversation is, I'm hearing the stuff that he's in essence been ingrained with, because hate is taught. I don't care who you are. Hate and fear are two things that are taught. And so in essence, he was taught to think this way. And so everything that he was saying, I'm taking it all in. And then it's like, I can go back and now I can put a game plan together as far as like, okay, when he says this about Black people, I get to prove him wrong because I'm doing the complete opposite. But if I'm, once again, if I'm sitting in those conversations and we're butting heads and it becomes a yelling match, nothing's going to be solved. And so I'm saying all of this because Lenny had to put his pride aside. Lenny had to swallow a lot of humble pie, even though I know with every fiber of my being that this man is wrong. And now I've been married to my wife 17 years. We just celebrated 17 years in January. Thank you.
Awesome.
2 summers ago, obviously not last summer because of COVID, the summer before, 2 years ago was the first time I had a conversation with him. And
wow.
At that time, 15 years. But guess what? It was me humbling myself and having that conversation. And so humility is literally you putting aside all of your thoughts, your ideas, and what you think of yourself, putting all of that stuff to the side and taking upon whatever of the other person. So it's hard, but I'm not saying that this thing is easy. It was totally hard sitting in a room with him, sitting across the table from him and having a conversation, because Lord knows I didn't want to do it, but I knew it was important to my wife. So, and all of that, man, I think humility is I think it's the main piece.
Okay, we've got a really tough one here, guys.
Uh-oh.
Get ready. All right. So the truth is that in general, in Black America, you have a lot of success. You have a lot of growing middle class, rising incomes. What about successful people who leave the neighborhood. So, you know, you kind of have that drain, and then the people who are left are the ones who are most struggling. And is this kind of a trap? You know, there's no way out, where once you are doing better, you think, well, why would I live here where there's such problems?
Mhm.
Yeah.
How do you get out of that cycle?
Oh, man.
Well, so that is a very much a reality. And I don't blame people when they make those decisions.
Yeah.
One way to say it, and just to kind of clarify even the question, is if you're in North City, it's not because you chose to be there. I might be the only exception to that rule, or there's a very few exceptions. But most people are stuck.
Yeah.
And when you get unstuck, you get out.
You're like, woohoo, time to go.
But and here's the silver lining. Some of the best community relationships I've ever seen exist in North St. Louis.
Yeah.
Exist in the Black community in St. Louis. So just because you got out, now think about it this way. Just because you got out doesn't mean that you're disconnected. In fact, you will still be connected. And the way I would describe it is you're potentially paving a way for those connections that are still in the city to do the exact same thing. Not flee the city, but to better themselves.
Yeah.
We had a guy that graduated. He was one of the first in his family to graduate. He got connected with another nonprofit and moved in with them in the county. And that for Christmas, he got too many Christmas presents or something like that. And he ended up taking all of his presents and giving them back to the kids in the city. And when he did that, it made me realize because my fear was exactly what that question is. It's like, what happens? Like, they're all like, except that his heart, his desire is to still be there with them.
Yeah.
Now he's not there yet, but we've had several students of ours that are now going into nonprofit management as a career choice, so they can start up the next LOVEtheLOU or put us out of business. Like
That's awesome.
That's the solution.
Yeah.
They still have the relationships. They've been given something. They're going to go away for a season, and now hopefully with their life be put on a different track to give back.
Yeah.
So once again, those relationships, if they're at the center, which I think they are with the ones we're talking about, then immediately create pathways and they're able to give back in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to wrap up, but before we do, I'm going to make a couple of announcements at the very end for other things that people can get involved in. But Lucas and Lenny, what if people want to get involved with LOVEtheLOU?
We'll take it.
What sort of things can they do? How should they go about it?
You can totally contact us up here. The easiest thing of email, it's our first name at LOVEtheLOU.com. So Lucas at LOVEtheLOU.com, Lenny at LOVEtheLOU.com, Carlene, CARLINE at LOVEtheLOU.com. We need a lot because we're getting a lot more students in. And then with us starting this new program of 18 to 25-year-olds, our biggest thing is we're always wanting mentors, but we really want folks to help us in this arena of like helping them get jobs, anything that's dealing with tech and computer savvy. If that's you, come on, because these kids are starting to show interest in computer graphics, coding, whatever the case. Please feel free to.
No, I'd say we really want to become a bridge, and if we're not already, be a bridge between anybody that's saying, I want to love the city, I want to show action.
Yeah.
My question to you would be, all right, what are you good at? Like, tell me how you want to love the city. And then almost always we can fit you into the 3 areas of career pathways, helping somebody along youth mentoring, which gets into tutoring, which gets into helping, not just from an educational standpoint, but life skills and all kinds of great stuff there.
Yeah.
And then housing and like an ownership and an equity. And we've seen pretty much every single skill that we will cram into those three areas. So we've tried it all, and we'll keep trying it. This year we'll have, even in the, wrapping up with COVID, hopefully, we'll have over 1,000 volunteers that work with us that come in. And so we're getting used to that question of, what do I do? We want to help you love the city and be a part of this solution.
And nothing's too small. It could be as simple a thing as, man, all I know is photography. Okay, great. I'll give you 3 kids to take on a on a photography trip. It's a thing where it's showing them what you do on a daily basis. If you're a business owner and you're like, man, I can't do nothing, trust me, we can figure out something. It could be a thing where you're, once again, invite a handful of kids in and just show them the day to day. There's lots that
And
people can
last year before COVID hit, Clifton Talbert was in town, who wrote Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored and Who Owns the Ice House. And we brought a whole crowd of LOVEtheLOU high schoolers down, and they got to meet the author and hear his inspiring story and get some Chick-fil-A, and it was great, and so just those expansive experiences that open up the world to them, in the world of maybe coming to Lindenwood University, which would be awesome.
There we go.
Yeah, so there's a ton of possibilities. And if you guys forget anything about contacting LOVEtheLOU, you can always contact me, and I'll connect you, rferguson@lindenwood.edu. And then I just wanted to end by reminding particularly the students that the Hammond Institute has a Student Fellows program, where we do all kinds of interesting things with students. And so if you are interested in the stuff that the Hammond Institute does, please contact us, contact me at rferguson@lindenwood.edu, and I will get you plugged in there. We've taken trips, we've done reading groups, all kinds of things. We also have a PPE micro-credential, which is philosophy, politics, and economics. And we have some very exciting things happening there, including the possibility of possibly a PPE team. So if those are intellectual interests of yours, please let me know. We can help you put together that micro-credential. And then finally, there is an exciting opportunity for Lindenwood students this spring with Get Money Smart at Lindenwood, which is helping to equip Lindenwood students with common sense principles and practices to take control of their finances and be responsible decision makers. So if you want to get your money in order, let us know too, and we'll get you signed up for that program. It's especially for Lindenwood students. So I just want to thank everybody so much. What an awesome set of questions from the audience. Really, really great. And thank you so much to Lenny and Lucas for sharing your stories with us, your hearts for the city of St. Louis, and the model that you're inviting us into. I really appreciate you spending your time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
We'll see you.